A diver's hand brushes seagrass off the Mediterranean floor, and suddenly, the sand glitters like a riverbed of bronze. 50,000 Roman coins, still stacked, still waiting, still exactly where they sank 16 centuries ago. The ship that carried them is still missing, and its cargo is speaking across the centuries. It began with something unusual in the seagrass, a shape that didn't belong, a glint beneath the sand just offshore from Arzacena, in shallow Mediterranean waters where divers often explore without expecting history to surface. But this time, it did. The diver surfaced with a handful of bronze coins, each one stamped with the face of a Roman emperor. Within hours, Italian archaeological authorities were notified. Within days, underwater drones were deployed to map the scatter field. What they found wasn't just a handful of loose change. It was up to 50,000 Foley's coins, small denomination bronze currency from the 4th century AD, lying in near mint condition across the seabed. The kind of volume that doesn't come from a lost purse or a single traveler's misfortune. It comes from a ship's hold, but the ship itself remains hidden. The northeastern coast of Sardinia is no stranger to ancient wrecks. The island sits at a crossroads of Mediterranean trade routes between Rome and Carthage, between Gaul and Africa, between empire and frontier. For centuries, ships passed these shores carrying grain, wine, olive oil, slaves, pottery, and coin. Many never made it past, but this find is different, not because of what was lost, but because of what survived and what's still missing. The coins themselves are pristine, struck with imperial portraits, inscribed with the iconography of Constantine's successors, the kind of coinage that circulated across the late Roman Empire during a period of economic reform, territorial strain, and relentless Mediterranean trade. Each coin weighs only a few grams, bronze, not gold, the small change of empire. But in this volume, they represent something far larger, a functioning economy, a supply chain, a web of trust and transaction that spanned 3 continents. And now, archaeologists are using ROVs and sonar mapping to trace the scatter pattern back to its source, the wreck that must be nearby. The challenge is precision. The seabed here is soft. Sediment shifts with every current. Coins don't stay where they land. They migrate, settle, get buried, get exposed again by storms. The task isn't just to collect artifacts, it's to reconstruct the original layout, to understand how the cargo was stowed, to read the debris field like a crime scene. Because that's what it is, a disaster frozen in time, a merchant's nightmare, a crew's last moments, and perhaps, if the ship's structure can be found, a chance to understand exactly what went wrong. The Italian Ministry of Culture has already declared the site protected under maritime law. The exact coordinates remain classified. Access is restricted. Penalties for looting are severe. But the search continues, meter by meter, across a debris field that may hold not just coins, but the physical memory of a voyage that never reached port, if the wreck can be located. The drones move slowly, methodically. Cameras sweep across the sand. Sonar pulses measure depth and density. Every anomaly is logged, every artifact photographed in place before it's touched. This is not treasure hunting. This is forensic archaeology. The goal isn't wealth, it's knowledge, and the clock is ticking. Sardinia's underwater landscape tells the story of millennia. Phoenician traders established outposts here over 3,000 years ago. Carthaginians fortified the harbors. Greeks built temples, and Rome eventually claimed it all, turning the island into a granary, a waypoint, a strategic anchor in the western Mediterranean. The waters around Arzacena have revealed artifacts from all these periods. Pottery shards from Greek wine merchants, Phoenician anchors, medieval cargo. Each layer a chapter in the island's relationship with the sea. But this Roman coin field, with its massive cargo, stands apart. Not just for the quantity of artifacts, but for what they reveal about the mechanics of imperial commerce at a moment of profound transition. The 4th century was a pivot point. The empire had survived the crisis of the 3rd century, barely. Diocletian had restructured the government. Constantine had moved the capital to Constantinople. The old certainties were crumbling. The borders were under siege. The economy was fragmenting. And yet trade continued. Ships still sailed. Merchants still moved goods. Coins still changed hands. The empire was transforming, but it hadn't collapsed. Not yet. A ship carrying this cargo was part of that system. A working vessel in a working economy. Its cargo of bronze phallus coins wasn't treasure in the traditional sense. It was liquidity. The physical manifestation of economic exchange. Money meant to circulate, to pay, to facilitate. Whether it was a tax shipment heading to Rome, a military payroll bound for a frontier garrison, or a merchant's capital investment, we may never know for certain. But the volume suggests official business. Private traders rarely moved this much coinage at once. The logistics, the security, the risk. It points to state involvement. Roman provincial administration required constant movement of currency. Taxes collected in one region had to be transported to another. Soldiers stationed on distant frontiers needed regular pay. Public works projects required funding. The machinery of empire ran on metal currency flowing through a network of roads, ships, and trusted intermediaries. The vessel that carried these coins was one link in that chain, and when it broke, the consequences rippled outward. A garrison waiting for pay, a governor unable to complete a construction project, a merchant's contract voided. Somewhere, someone's ledger didn't balance. Somewhere, a family waited at a dock for a ship that would never arrive. The sea claimed not just cargo, but futures. But finding the coins is only the beginning of the mystery. The vessel wasn't just carrying currency. It was carrying the lifeblood of a fading empire trying to hold itself together across a fractured sea. The 4th century was a turning point for Rome. The empire had split into Eastern and Western administrations. Diocletian had restructured the economy. Constantine had introduced new coinage. Christianity had become the state religion. The borders were under constant pressure from Germanic tribes, Huns, Persians. And through it all, the Mediterranean remained the empire's circulatory system. Grain from Egypt fed Rome. Olive oil from North Africa lit its lamps. Wine from Gaul filled its taverns. Pottery from workshops in Carthage and Athens lined its markets. And currency, bronze, silver, gold, moved in every direction, keeping the machine running. A ship like this would have been built for endurance, not speed. Wooden hull, probably oak or pine. Square sail made of linen or hemp. Shallow draft to navigate coastal harbors and river mouths. Crew of perhaps a dozen men. Capacity of several tons. Roman merchant vessels followed patterns established over centuries. They were descendants of Greek designs, refined by Phoenician engineering, adapted for the particular demands of Mediterranean trade. The hull would have been constructed using mortise and tenon joinery, an elaborate system where planks were edge-joined with precisely carved slots and pegs, creating a shell that was then reinforced with internal ribs. The construction was labor-intensive but effective. These ships could flex with the waves without breaking. They could be beached for repairs. They could navigate shallow coastal waters while still carrying substantial cargo. But they had limitations. Roman ships couldn't sail into the wind. They depended on favorable weather. They hugged coastlines, hopping from port to port, rather than crossing open water when possible. They avoided winter sailing, the period from November through March when storms made the Mediterranean too dangerous. Yet accidents happened even in the sailing season. The ship off Sardinia likely moved between Roman ports in what is now southern France, North Africa, and the Italian peninsula. part of a commercial web that had sustained the empire for centuries. But the Mediterranean is deceptive. Sailors in antiquity called it Mare Nostrum, our sea. But it was never truly tamed. Even in calm seasons, sudden squalls can rise from nowhere. Coastal rocks lurk just beneath the surface. Reefs shift, currents change, visibility drops. And once a ship is in trouble, there's no rescue, no radio, no helicopters, just the crew, the wind, and the sea. Navigation in the ancient world relied on landmarks, experience, and luck. Pilots memorized coastlines. They watched for seabirds. They measured depth with weighted lines. They prayed to Neptune, Poseidon, whichever god claimed the stretch of water. Coastal navigation meant watching for specific features: a distinctive rock formation, a temple on a headland, the color of the water indicating depth. Pilots passed knowledge down through apprenticeship. A good pilot knew every harbor, every safe anchorage, every treacherous reef along his route. But there were no charts precise enough to avoid every hazard. No weather forecast to warn of incoming storms. No lighthouses on every headland. The Romans did build some lighthouses. The Pharos of Alexandria was one of the 7 wonders. Smaller beacons marked important harbors, but vast stretches of coastline remained unmarked, especially in areas like Sardinia, where settlements were sparse and traffic was lighter than the major routes. Historical records from the period show frequent losses. Manifests that never arrived. Ships reported overdue, then presumed lost. Merchants filing insurance claims with guilds. Families waiting at docks for men who would never return. Inscriptions from the period occasionally mention shipwrecks. Tombstones for sailors lost at sea. Votive offerings in temples thanking gods for survival. Legal documents settling estates of merchants whose ships went down. The sea was both highway and graveyard. The vessel carrying these coins likely met its end quickly. The coins show no sign of violent dispersal, no evidence of piracy or fire. They're still clustered, still grouped in a pattern consistent with how they would have been stored in wooden crates or ceramic containers within the hold. The scatter pattern suggests a sudden sinking, a breach in the hull, water flooding the hold, the ship listing, then going down bow first or stern first, settling into the sand in seconds or minutes. There would have been no time to salvage the cargo. If the ship struck a submerged rock, the impact would have been devastating. Roman hulls were strong but not armored. A sharp reef could puncture planking. Once seawater poured in, the weight would have dragged the vessel down rapidly. If a storm was the cause, the ship might have been driven onto rocks by wind and current. Sailors would have fought to control the vessel, to drop anchor, to turn away from shore. But in heavy weather, with waves breaking over the deck and wind shredding the sail, control would have been nearly impossible. We can imagine those final moments, the sound of splintering wood, the shouts of crew members, the cold rush of seawater, the desperate scramble to reach the surface as the ship tilted and descended. And then silence, 1,600 years of it. But where is the ship now? The wood has likely degraded. Roman-era hulls, especially in shallow, oxygenated waters, don't always survive intact. Bacteria consume the cellulose. Shipworms tunnel through the planks. Iron nails corrode. Rope disintegrates. Sails vanish. What might remain buried in the sediment are fragments, dense materials that resist decay, bronze, lead, stone, perhaps ceramic storage vessels, perhaps the heaviest structural elements. And what the coins reveal is a snapshot, a single moment in the long decline of Rome, a merchant trying to move goods, a crew navigating familiar waters, a storm, a rock, a miscalculation, and then the sea closed over them. For 16 centuries, the coins lay undisturbed. Seagrass grew over them, sand buried them, fish swam past. Tides shifted them a few centimeters at a time. Storms exposed fragments, then covered them again. The biological processes of the seabed slowly transformed the site. Marine organisms colonized the metal surfaces. Calcium deposits built up. Sediment compacted around the coins. The site became part of the ecosystem, a habitat, a geological feature, until a diver, on an ordinary day, saw something that shouldn't have been there. Yet the ship itself remains elusive. These weren't just coins in a vault. They were wages, taxes, bribes, and livelihoods, carried by men whose names we'll never know. Every false coin in that lost cargo had a purpose. In the 4th century, bronze coinage like this was used for everyday transactions, paying soldiers, buying bread, settling debts. It wasn't the gold of emperors or the silver of senators. It was the working currency of the empire's backbone. A fallis could buy a loaf of bread, a jar of oil, a night's lodging at a roadside inn. It could pay a day laborer, settle a tavern tab, buy a sacrifice at a temple. The purchasing power of a bronze fallis varied across the 4th century as inflation eroded value. Diocletian's reforms had attempted to stabilize currency, but the empire's economic problems were structural. Too much territory to defend, too many enemies, too much bureaucracy, not enough productive capacity. Successive emperors debased coinage, reducing precious metal content to stretch resources. They minted more coins to pay more soldiers to fight more wars. The predictable result was inflation. But the coins still circulated, still facilitated exchange, still represented value even as that value fluctuated. 50,000 coins is a substantial sum, not a fortune, but a payroll, a tax shipment, a merchant's investment in goods to be traded at the next port, and it never arrived. Somewhere, someone was waiting for this money, a garrison commander expecting to pay his troops, a provincial governor collecting taxes to send to Rome, a merchant with debts to settle before the next sailing season. When the ship didn't arrive, records would have been checked, inquiries made, ledgers adjusted, the loss written off as one more casualty of the sea, and life went on. But for the men on that ship, life stopped. Roman administration was obsessive about record keeping. Tax receipts, military payrolls, customs documents, shipping manifests, all meticulously recorded on papyrus, wax tablets, wooden boards, copies filed in multiple locations, bureaucrats checking, cross-referencing, auditing. When a shipment went missing, the paper trail would have revealed the discrepancy quickly. Investigations would follow. Was it lost at sea? Stolen by pirates? Embezzled by corrupt officials? In this case, the answer was probably clear. Lost at sea. The ship simply didn't arrive. No survivors. No wreckage found. Just absence. The coins themselves are remarkable, not for their rarity, but for their condition. Underwater, bronze oxidizes slowly. In the right environment. Cool, stable. Shielded from strong currents, metal can rest for millennia, looking almost freshly minted. These coins still bear crisp portraits, imperial faces frozen in profile, inscriptions legible enough to date the reign, the mint, the propaganda of the moment. Constantine's successors stare out from the bronze, men whose names we know from history books: Constantius II, Constans, Julian. Emperors who ruled a fracturing world, who debased currency to pay armies, who watched the borders crumble. The iconography on the coins tells its own story. Imperial portraits showing the emperor in profile, wearing military regalia or imperial diadem. Reverse images depicting military victories, religious symbols, personifications of virtues like victory or peace. These were propaganda tools as much as currency. Every transaction reinforced the emperor's image. Every coin that changed hands was a tiny billboard for imperial authority. But they also bear something else: the human scale of the loss. Consider the crew. We don't know their names. We don't know if they were freedmen, slaves, or citizens. We don't know if they had families waiting in port or if they were drifters moving between contracts. But we know they were there. Roman merchant crews were small. A ship carrying this much cargo might have carried 10 to 15 men, a captain, a pilot, a few deckhands, maybe a cook, maybe a scribe to manage the manifest. Merchant sailors occupied an ambiguous social position. They weren't wealthy, but they weren't the lowest class either. They had specialized skills. They traveled widely. They saw things most people never would. But the work was dangerous. Death at sea was common enough that it didn't merit special commemoration. Sailors accepted the risk as part of the profession. They would have known the route, sailed it before. Recognized the landmarks along Sardinia's coast, known where to anchor for the night, where to take on fresh water, where to avoid rocks. But something went wrong. Maybe the weather turned. Maybe they misjudged the depth. Maybe the hull was already compromised. A plank weakened by worms. A seam leaking pitch. Ship maintenance was constant. Hulls had to be periodically beached and recaulked. Sails needed repair. Rigging needed replacement. Roman ships were maintained through continuous minor repairs rather than major overhauls. But wood rots, rope frays, pitch cracks. Eventually, despite best efforts, structural integrity fails. We don't know if they had time to abandon ship, if they made it to shore, if they drowned clinging to debris. We don't know if anyone survived to tell the story. The Mediterranean is only a few kilometers from shore at this location. A strong swimmer might have made it, but in rough seas, weighted down by clothing, exhausted from fighting to control the ship, survival would have been unlikely. And we know the sea didn't distinguish between the value of the cargo and the value of the lives that carried it. The coins are the closest we get to touching the ordinary people of the ancient world. Not the generals, not the emperors, the workers, the traders, the men whose labor moved the empire, one shipment at a time. What the drones are mapping now isn't just a scatter field. It's a grave, a workplace, a failure, a moment of terror, cold water, and the realization that no amount of skill or prayer would bring the ship back to the surface. The coins were packed carefully, stacked in containers, sealed for transport. Someone counted them. Someone loaded them. Someone expected them to arrive. The ship was maintained, caulked, rigged, provisioned. Someone trusted it to make the journey. And then, in a matter of minutes, all that care, all that planning, all that human effort, gone. 1,600 years later, the coins are still there, still countable, still intact. But the men are not. And the ship that carried them both remains hidden somewhere beneath the sand. Finding the coins was the easy part. Recovering the story without destroying it and locating the wreck itself is where the real work begins. Underwater archaeology is a war against time, chemistry, and human greed. The moment the site was reported, Italian authorities moved to classify the coordinates. Under Italian maritime law and the UNESCO Convention on the Protection of the Underwater Cultural Heritage, any wreck older than a century is considered state property. Looting is illegal. Salvage rights don't apply. Violators face fines, imprisonment, confiscation of equipment. But laws only work if the site can be protected. Shallow coastal waters are accessible. Recreational divers pass through regularly. A scatter field of bronze coins in seagrass is visible to anyone with a mask and fins. The risk of illegal removal is high. That's why the search is being conducted with drones and ROVs, remotely operated vehicles that can survey, photograph, and map without disturbing the seabed. These machines use sonar to detect density changes in the sediment, cameras to document artifacts in situ, robotic arms to collect samples only when necessary. Modern underwater archaeology has been transformed by technology. 20 years ago, documenting a site like this would have required teams of divers working in shifts, fighting cold, currents, and limited bottom time. Now, ROVs can operate for hours. They don't get cold or tired. They don't consume air. They can hover motionless in current that would exhaust a human diver. They can carry lights, cameras, sensors, manipulator arms. But they're not perfect. Operators must train extensively to control them precisely. Water clarity affects visibility. Currents can make positioning difficult. Equipment failures happen. The drones move on thrusters. No propellers to kick up sediment. No diver's fins to disturb the layout. Every movement is recorded, every image time-stamped and georeferenced. This is slow work. A single square meter can take an hour to document. Photographers must adjust for light, for water clarity, for the angle of the sun. Sonar operators must calibrate for density, for depth, for interference from biological growth. Photogrammetry, taking hundreds of overlapping images to create three-dimensional models, has become standard practice. Software stitches the images together, producing detailed virtual models that researchers can examine without returning to the site. These models become permanent records. Even if the physical site degrades, the digital version persists. And then there's the analysis. Every coin must be cataloged: emperor, mint, date, condition, weight, any irregularities in the strike, any corrosion patterns that might indicate how it was stored. Numismatists can extract astonishing information from ancient coins. The wear patterns indicate how long they circulated. Dye analysis, studying the metal stamps used to strike the coins, can identify individual production runs, sometimes down to specific days. Mint marks indicate where coins were produced. The Roman Empire operated mints across its territory: Rome, Alexandria, Antioch, Lyon, London. Each facility used distinctive marks. By analyzing the distribution of mints represented in the cargo, researchers can trace the coin's origins. Were they collected from a single source? Multiple sources? Does the distribution suggest they were gathered through taxation, trade, or military pay? 50,000 coins is a massive cataloging project. Each one photographed, measured, documented. Compared against databases of known issues, the work will take years, but even careful recovery comes with risk. Bronze coins, once exposed to air, begin to oxidize rapidly. The sea has preserved them in a stable, low-oxygen environment. Remove them, and the clock starts. Conservation labs must stabilize each artifact, cleaning, treating, sealing, before degradation erases the details that make them valuable as evidence. Bronze disease, a form of corrosion that can destroy artifacts in weeks, is a constant threat. It occurs when chlorides trapped in the metal react with moisture and oxygen, producing powdery green corrosion that eats through the metal. Treatment involves removing chlorides through repeated washing, then sealing the surface to prevent further reaction. The process is painstaking. Coins are soaked in distilled water to remove salt, then treated with chemicals to neutralize corrosion, then dried in controlled conditions to prevent cracking, then coated with a sealant to prevent further oxidation. Each coin can take days. 50,000 coins will take years. And all of this must happen before erosion, storms, or human interference erase the site entirely. Winter storms churn the seabed. Currents shift sand. Biological activity, algae, barnacles, shipworms, degrades organic material. Every year that passes, the site changes. Artifacts migrate. Context is lost. Archaeologists are racing against entropy and against looters. News of the find has spread. Online forums buzz with speculation. Treasure hunters study satellite images. Dive shops near Arzachena. report increased interest in the area. The economics of looting are simple. Bronze coins from a Roman wreck have market value. Collectors pay. Auction houses sometimes ask insufficient questions. The black market in antiquities is vast and sophisticated. A single diver with a bag can remove hundreds of coins in minutes. A small boat with equipment can strip a site in days. Italian authorities have increased patrols. Coast Guard vessels circle the restricted zone. Fines are publicized. Arrests are made. But the sea is vast. Enforcement is difficult. And the lure of ancient coins, even bronze ones, is strong. That's why the exact coordinates remain secret. Why the Ministry of Culture releases only limited information. Why even the archaeologists working the site are bound by non-disclosure agreements. The strategy is containment. Control information flow. Minimize opportunities for looting. Document rapidly before context is lost. Because what we do next will decide if this history survives another century. And now, thousands of years later, we're left to piece together what happened, one coin at a time. While we search for the ship that carried them, the past is still out there, waiting in the deep. Keep watching, keep listening. Because the sea remembers everything. And sometimes, piece by piece, it gives back what it took.